Hi, my name is Grant Goldbeck. I'm an Elite Series pro. I'd love to talk about this new bait out here. It's been about a year, and it's a technique that's been around for a little while in Japan, and we finally brought it over to the U.S. Thank goodness to DUO REALIS. It's a prop bait, and the technique is called spy baiting. It's silent capture is what it is. A lot of guys are catching suspending fish on this. They're catching schooling fish on it. Some of the things that I do that are a little bit different, I used to always go to picking up a big swim bait before I left the spot. If I was fishing a point with a football jig or fishing a weed line or that sort of thing, before I left and would go to another spot in a tournament, I always picked up a big swim bait. And sometimes it didn't work and sometimes it did, but when you're tournament fishing, you're always looking for that one fish that might get you over the edge, and if it takes you an extra minute to do, it's worth it to me. So what I like to do with this bait, there's a few things that a swim bait and potentially any other bait that you're using out there may do. If I'm fishing a jig in the grass, well, think about all the followers sometimes that follow that bait up to the boat, or that fish up to the boat that you may have hooked. And before those fish disperse back in the grass, sometimes they just mill around and they may suspend out there, kind of hang out for a little while and relax, The same thing with point fishing. If you're fishing a point, I never want to throw a swim bait out off the end of the point or towards the bank on the point. I want to throw it out off the end of the point and bring those fish up to me instead of bringing them out in that suspending zone where they're harder to catch. What this bait has done for me before I leave an area is those fish that you don't see that are following the fish that you've hooked on that area, whether a point or the grass bed or a brush pile down there or a ledge, the fish that you may not see follow it up, this bait goes to work for me a lot of times. And before I leave a spot, I'll cast across that point or I'll cast across that brush pile, and I'm going to try to target the fish that are suspended after I've left that spot. Not necessarily the ones that were suspended when I pulled up to that spot, but the ones that I've made suspend by either reeling in fish or reeling a bait back to the boat. And that's when this bait comes out for me a lot. I use it for a lot of other things, but I never leave a spot nowadays without picking up this spin bait. And my line choice is generally anywhere between 5 and 8 pound line. Some guys are throwing it on 4 pound. 6 pound is a good number for me, but when I'm tournament fishing, if I can get away with it, I like to use a little bit heavier line. So if I can get it down to where I need to get it to quick enough, I'll go with 8 just to be able to turn the fish and get them in and keep them away from the trouble. But this is a bait you got to check out. It's a technique in its own. Prop baits have been around for a long time. But what's very cool about it is this bait, the closer the fish gets to it, it starts to notice different things. For instance, they'll see this bait kind of cruising across the, streamline across the midsection, mid-range, say 10 feet off the bottom, 10 feet from the surface, and they'll see a little wobble like this off of that bait. A little rolling action, mimicking a bait fish. Well, it's streamlined going across there, and as they get closer, they get curious, and they may start to pick up on the color. Then they start to see these black props. I'll even take some of the props myself, and I'll actually blacken them out a little bit darker, so they blend in a little bit more. And so as that fish gets closer, they see something moving. They start to see this little tiny deal moving here, and it acts more like a tail, not necessarily a prop. That keys them in a little bit closer, and they start to trace behind it, and what happens then is they start to pick up the frequencies that this bait is giving off that no other bait gives off. And so that's some of the cool qualities about that spin bait. But I highly recommend when you're tournament fishing or just out there fun fishing, try it. Before you leave an area, try to key in on some of those suspended fish. Maybe look on your side imaging if you have that, your down imaging, and see what you've actually brought up off the bottom fishing a different technique, and throw a spin bait out there and target those fish and count it down to them and see if you can catch those fish that you're leaving behind.